大家好，这是个东，欢迎来到我的频道。今天要翻译的东西会比较专业，而且比较长。这是一个辩论访谈，是 Jordan Peterson 教授的访谈，这不是新的东西，这已经至少是7年以前的访谈的 interview。Jordan Peterson 这个教授，我这里就先不，因为影片翻译的内容本身已经有点长了，所以我不想把影片拖太长，我就不做太详尽的介绍。他是一个临床心理学家，然后他现在他算是蛮有名气的，他在世界范围内都蛮有名气的。然后他帮助很多人，无论是男性还是女性，作为一个临床心理学家。然后他有过很多的讲座，他有自己的频道，大家有兴趣可以去搜他的名字，Jordan Peterson。他有办过很多的讲座、演讲，而且他现在已经有一点年纪了。他是从他蛮年轻的时候就已经开始出来做很多的讲坛，而且替很多人做咨询、咨商，帮助很多人在他们的人生中，在他们的事业上取得了成就，或者是至少安稳、平稳。解决了很多人的忧郁症啊、anxiety、焦虑、忧郁、对人生的迷茫什么的，是一个我很欣赏的教授。我很欣赏的心理学家。所以这个访谈的内容主要就是他上了一个节目，这个节目的女主持人，是一个极端左派，有点咄咄逼人呢。翻译的时候我看了其实是有点不爽，但是呢，无所谓，反正大家看了自由心证吧。内容大概就是他们在讨论说同工同酬，对，台湾也有在讨论这个议题嘛，同工同酬就是说男生跟女生的薪资待遇有两性的工资待遇有差距，就是说做同样的工作，女性拿到的钱比男性赚到的少，那这样不公平，在探讨这个议题。这个台湾也有在探讨嘛？那其实欧美那边很早好几年前行之有年了，就一直在探讨这个议题。然后这个辩论主要在聚焦这一点，在探讨是否应该同工同酬，什么是平等，什么是两性平等，如何实现两性平等，然后两性之间的差异这样。然后 Jordan Peterson 教授在他这个访谈中提出了很多，就是从实证跟实例上举出说，很多社会大众，不管是反正很多人对于同工同酬，还有对于说两性工资差距，还有两性之间的差异所抱有的不理解和误解，这样，他提出很多的实证跟实例来去解释给大家听。但是因为他是一个非常非常专业的人，他是一个非常专业的学者，所以他的用字遣词也是非常艰深、非常专业，所以这个超级难翻译的，超难翻译的。我有看到别人已经翻译了，可是就是因为我看到他的翻译，我觉得还蛮多，就是不够精准，甚至是有错的地方，就是他有翻错的地方，意思是甚至是完全相反，或者是不对的、不一样的意思，跟原文的意思其实对我看到我觉得是有差的，原文其实不是这个意思。所以我就决定我自己还是要来翻译，然后因为我看到的那个翻译的版本也是对岸的墙内的翻译，所以他有些那个敏感词给它消音掉，我觉得蛮可惜的，所以我就决定自己来翻译。我大概分上下两集啦，因为内容有点长，如果整个翻的话会超过30多分钟，我怕太长的影片大家不好吸收消化。那我也不废话太多，我们就直接先来带大家看这个翻译的影片，然后在访谈结束以后再补充一点点细节跟我自己的想法。那就这样，我们来看吧。
Jordan Peterson, you've said that men need to, quote, grow the hell up. Tell me why.
Well, because there's nothing uglier than an old infant. There's nothing good about it. People who don't grow up don't find the sort of meaning in their life that sustains them through difficult times, and they are certain to encounter difficult times. And they're left bitter and resentful and without purpose and adrift and hostile and resentful and vengeful and arrogant and deceitful and of no use to themselves and of no use to anyone else and no partner for a woman, and there's nothing in it that's good.
So you say, I mean, that sounds pretty bad. You're saying
It's
there's a
bad.
crisis of masculinity. I mean, what do you do about it?
You help people understand why it's necessary and important for them to grow up and adopt responsibility, why that isn't a shake your finger and get your act together sort of thing, why it's more like a delineation of the kind of destiny that makes life worth living. I've been telling young men, but it's not, I wasn't specifically aiming this message at young men to begin with. It just kind of turned out that way.
And it's mostly, you admit, it's mostly men listening. I mean,
it
90% of your audiences are male,
Well, it's
right?
about 80% on YouTube, which is YouTube is a male domain primarily. So it's hard to tell how much of it is because YouTube is male and how much of it is because of what I'm saying. But what I've been telling young men is that there's an actual reason why they need to grow up, which is that they have something to offer. People have within them this capacity to set the world straight, and that's necessary to manifest in the world. And that also doing so is where you find the meaning that sustains you in life.
So what's gone wrong then?
Oh, God, all sorts of things have gone wrong. I don't think that young men hear words of encouragement. Some of them never in their entire lives, as far as I can tell. That's what they tell me. And the fact that the words that I've been speaking, the YouTube lectures that I've done and put online, for example, have had such a dramatic impact is an indication that young men are starving for this sort of message, because, like, why in the world would they have to derive it from a lecture on YouTube? You know, they're not being taught that it's important to develop yourself.
But does it bother you that your audience is predominantly male? Isn't that a bit divisive?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's no more divisive than the fact that YouTube is primarily male and Tumblr is primarily female.
Isn't it?
Tumblr is primarily female.
But you're just saying that's the way it is.
Well, I'm not saying anything. It's just an observation that that's the way it is. There's plenty of women that are watching my lectures and coming to my talks and buying my books. It's just that the majority of them happen to be men.
What's in it for the women, though?
Well, what sort of partner do you want? Do you want an overgrown child? Or do you want someone to contend with that's going to help you and that
So
you
you're
can
saying
rely on?
women have some sort of duty to sort of help fix the crisis of masculinity?
It depends on what they want. No, I mean, it's exactly how I laid it out. Like, women deeply want men who are competent and powerful. And I don't mean power in that they can exert tyrannical control over others. That's not power. That's just corruption. Power is competence. And why in the world would you not want a competent partner? Well, I know why, actually. You can't dominate a competent partner. So if you want domination,
want to dominate, is that what you're saying?
No, I'd say women who have had their relationships impaired, their relationships with men impaired, and who are afraid of such relationships will settle for a weak partner because they can dominate them. But it's a suboptimal solution.
Do you think that's what a lot of women are doing?
I think there's a substantial minority of women who do that. And I think it's very bad for them. They're very unhappy. It's very bad for their partners, although the partners get the advantage of not having to take any responsibility.
But what gives you the right to say that? I mean, maybe that's how women want their relationships, those women. I mean, you're making these vast generalizations.
I'm a clinical psychologist.
Right, so you're saying you've done your research and women are unhappy dominating men.
I didn't say they were unhappy dominating men. I said it was a bad long-term solution.
Okay, you said it was making them miserable.
Thing. Yes, it is. And it depends on the time frame. I mean, there's intense pleasure in momentary domination. That's why people do it all the time. But it's no formula for a successful long-term relationship. That's reciprocal, right? Any long-term relationship is reciprocal, virtually by definition. So
let me put a quote to you from the book, where you say there are whole disciplines in universities forthrightly hostile towards men. These are the areas of study dominated by the postmodern neo-Marxist claim that Western culture in particular is an oppressive structure created by white men to dominate and exclude women. But then I want to put
minorities too, dominate and exclude.
Okay, sure. But I want to put to you that here in the UK, for example, let's take that as an example, the gender pay gap stands at just over 9%. You've got women at the BBC recently saying that the broadcaster is illegally paying them less than men to do the same job. You've got only 7 women running the top FTSE 100 companies.
Yeah.
So it seems to a lot of women that they're still being dominated and excluded, to quote your words back to you.
It does seem that way, but multivariate analysis of the pay gap indicate that it doesn't exist.
But that's just not true, is it?
That's
I mean, that
absolutely
9% pay gap, that's a gap between median hourly earnings between men and women.
But there's
that exists.
Yeah, but there's multiple reasons for that. One of them is gender, but it's not the only reason. Like, if you're a social scientist worth your salt, you never do a univariate analysis. Like you say, well, women in aggregate are paid less than men. Okay, well, then we break it down by age, we break it down by occupation, we break it down by interest, we break it down by personality.
But you're saying basically it doesn't matter if women aren't getting to the top, because that's what's skewing that gender pay gap, isn't it? You're saying, well, that's just a fact of
No,
life.
it's saying
Women
it
aren't
doesn't
necessarily
matter.
going to get to the top.
No, I'm not saying it doesn't matter either.
You're saying
I'm
it's
saying
a fact
there are
of life.
multiple reasons for it.
Yeah, but
and that
those
aren't being
reasons,
taken into
why
account.
should women put up with those reasons? Why should
Why should
women be
put up with it?
content
I'm not
not
saying
to
that
get
they
to
should
the top?
put up with it. I'm saying that the claim that the wage gap between men and women is only due to sex is wrong, and it is wrong. There's no doubt about that. The multivariate analysis have been done. So
Well,
I can give you an example.
You keep on talking about
Wait a second.
multivariate analysis.
Let me give you an
But
example.
I'm saying that 9% pay gap exists.
Yeah.
That's a gap between men and women. I'm not saying why it exists, but it exists. Now,
Yeah, but
if
you
you're
have
a
to say
woman,
why
that
it
seems
exists.
pretty unfair.
You have to say why it exists.
But do you agree that it's unfair? If you're a woman,
Not necessarily.
and on average you're getting paid 9% less than a man, that's not fair, is it?
It depends on why it's happening. I can give you an example. Okay. There's a personality trait known as agreeableness. Agreeable people are compassionate and polite. And agreeable people get paid less than less agreeable people for the same job. Women are more agreeable than men.
Again, a vast generalization. Some
It's not
women
a
are not more
generalization.
agreeable than
Yes,
men.
that's true, but that's right. And some women get paid more than men.
So you were saying that by and large, women are too agreeable to get the pay rises they deserve.
No, I'm saying that that's one component of a multivariate equation that predicts salary. It accounts for maybe 5% of the variance, something like that.
So surely
you
the
need about
answer-
you need about another 18 factors, one of which is gender. And there is prejudice, there's no doubt about that, but it accounts for a much smaller proportion of the variance in the pay gap than the radical feminists claim.
Okay, so rather than denying the pay gap exists, which is what you did at the beginning of this conversation, shouldn't you say to women, rather than being agreeable and not asking for a pay rise, go and ask for a pay rise? Make yourself disagreeable with your boss.
Oh, definitely, there's that. But I also didn't deny it existed. I denied it existed because of gender.
Okay.
See, because I'm very, very, very careful with my words.
So the pay gap exists, you accept that, but you're
Yes.
saying, I mean, the pay gap between men and women exists, but you're saying it's not because of gender, it's because women are too agreeable to ask for pay rises. So
It's
make
one
them-
of the reasons.
Okay, one of the reasons. So why not get them to ask for a pay rise?
I've
Wouldn't
done
that
that.
be a fairer
I've done
way of
that
proceeding?
many, many times in my career.
And they
I've
just don't?
counseled. Oh, they do it all the time. You can. It's so. One of the things that you do as a clinical psychologist is assertiveness training. So you might say, often you treat people for anxiety, you treat them for depression, and maybe the next most common category after that would be assertiveness training. And so I've had many, many women, extraordinarily competent women in my clinical and consulting practice, and we put together strategies for their career development that involve continual pushing, competing for higher wages, and often tripled their wages within a 5-year period, teaching
you
them how to
celebrate that?
negotiate. Of course.
So
Of
do
course.
you agree that you would be happy if that pay gap was eliminated completely?
It
Because
would
that's all
depend.
the radical feminists are saying.
It would depend on how it was eradicated and how the disappearance of it was measured.
And you're
These
saying
things
if
you
it's at the
can't- you
cost
can't-
of men, that's a problem.
Oh, there's all sorts of things that it could be at the cost of. It could even be at the cost of women's own interests. So,
Because they might not be happy if they get equal pay.
no, because it might interfere with other things that are causing the pay gap that women are choosing to do.
Like having children.
Well, or choosing careers that actually happen to be paid less, which women do a lot of.
But why shouldn't women have the right to choose not to have children or the right to choose those demanding careers?
They do. They can. Yeah, that's fine.
But you're saying that makes them unhappy, by and large.
I'm saying no, I'm not saying that. I actually haven't said that so far. in
You're
the
saying it
program.
makes them miserable.
No, I
at the
said that
beginning.
what was making them miserable was having weak partners. That makes them miserable.
Right.
I would say that many women around the age of, I would say between 28 and 32, have a career family crisis that they have to deal with. And I think that's partly because of the foreshortened time frame that women have to contend with. Like, women have to get the major pieces of their life put together faster than men, which is also partly why men aren't under so much pressure to grow up. So because for the typical woman, she has to have her career and family in order pretty much by the time she's 35. because otherwise the options start to run out. And so that puts a tremendous amount of stress on women, especially at the end of their 20s.
I think I take issue with the idea of the typical woman because, you know, all women are different. And that's what I want to just put another quote to you from the book.
Well,
You
they're
say,
different in some ways and the same in others.
okay, you say women become more vulnerable when they have children.
Oh,
And
yes.
you talked in one of your YouTube interviews about crazy harpy sisters. So, simple question. Is gender equality a myth in your view? Is that something that's just never going to happen?
It depends on what you mean by equality. No,
Being
if you
treated
mean that
fairly,
men and women
getting
are
the same opportunities?
fairly, we could get to a point where people were treated fairly or more fairly. I mean, people are treated pretty fairly in Western culture already, but we can
But they're
improve
really
that.
not, though, are they? I mean, otherwise, why
depends
would there only be 7 women running FTSE 100 companies in the UK? Why would there still be a pay gap, which we've
Oh, well,
discussed
that's
at
easy.
length?
It's easy to
Why are
answer
women
that
at the
question.
BBC saying that they're getting paid illegally less than men to do the same job?
Well, let's-
That's not fair,
Well,
is
let's
it?
go to the first question. Those are complicated questions. Seven women, repeat that one. There's only
7 women running the top FTSE 100 companies in the UK.
Okay. Well, the
I mean,
first
that's not
question
fair.
might be, why would you want to do that?
Why would a man want to do it? I
Well,
mean, there's a lot of money,
there's
it's an interesting
there's a
job,
certain
you know?
number of men, although not that many, who are perfectly willing to sacrifice virtually all of their life to the pursuit of a high-end career. So they'll work. These are men that are very intelligent. They're usually very, very conscientious. They're very driven. They're very high energy. They're very healthy. And they're willing to work 70 or 80 hours a week, nonstop, specialized at one thing to get to the top.
So you're saying women are just more sensible. They don't want that because it's not a nice life.
I'm saying that's part of it, definitely. And so I work
So
for...
you don't think there are barriers in their way that prevent them getting to the top
Oh,
of
there
those
are some
companies?
barriers, yeah, like men, for example. I mean, to get to the top of any organization is an incredibly competitive enterprise. And the men that you're competing with are simply not going to roll over and say, please take the position.
So let me come back to my
absolute
question.
all-out warfare.
Is gender equality a myth?
I don't know what you mean by the question. Men and women aren't the same, and they won't be the same. That doesn't mean they can't be treated fairly.
Is gender equality desirable?
If it means equality of outcome, then almost certainly it's undesirable. That's already been demonstrated in Scandinavia. Because in
What
Scandinavia...
do you mean by that? Equality of outcome is undesirable.
Well, men and women won't sort themselves into the same categories if you leave them alone to do it of their own accord. I've already seen that in Scandinavia. It's 20 to 1
So-
female nurses to male, something like that. It might not be quite that extreme, and approximately the same male engineers to female engineers. And that's a consequence of the free choice of men and women in the societies that have gone farther than any other societies to make gender equality the purpose of the law. Those are ineradicable differences. You can eradicate them with tremendous social pressure and tyranny, but if you leave men and women to make their own choices, you will not get equal outcomes.
Right, so you're saying that anyone who believes in equality, whether you call them feminists, call them whatever you want to call them, should basically give up because it ain't going to happen.
Only if they're aiming at equality of outcome.
So you're saying give people equality of opportunity, that's fine.
It's not only fine, it's eminently desirable for everyone, for individuals and for society.
But still women aren't going to make it. That's what you're really
It
saying.
depends on your measurement techniques. They're doing just fine in medicine. In fact, there are far more female physicians than there are male physicians. There are lots of disciplines that are absolutely dominated by women. Many, many disciplines, and they're doing great. So
Let me put something else to you from the book. You say the introduction of the equal pay for equal work argument immediately complicates even salary comparison beyond practicality for one simple reason. Who decides what work is equal? It's not possible. So the simple question is, do you believe in equal pay?
well, I made the argument there. It's like it depends on
So
who
you don't
defines
believe
it.
in equal pay?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Because a lot of people listening to you will just say, I mean, are we going back to the dark
That's
ages
because they're actually
here?
not listening. They're
I'm
just
listening very
projecting
carefully,
what
and I'm
they think.
hearing you basically saying women need to just accept they're never going to make it on equal terms, equal outcomes is how you defined it.
No, I didn't
If
say
I was
that.
a young
I said
woman
that equal...
watching that, I would go, well, I might as well just go and play with my Cindy dolls
I
and give
didn't
up
say
trying
that.
at school because I'm not going to get the top job I want because
said
there's
that
someone sitting there saying it's not possible
I
and it's
said
not
that
desirable,
equal
it's going to make
outcomes
you
aren't
miserable.
desirable. That's what I said. It's a
Yeah,
bad
it's not
social
desirable.
goal. I didn't say that women shouldn't be striving for the top or anything like that, because I don't believe that for a second.
Striving for the top, but you're going to put all those hurdles in their way, as has been in their way for centuries, and that's fine. You're saying that's fine.
No, I really
The
think
patriarchal system
I really
is
think
just
that's
fine.
silly. I do. I think that's silly. I really do. I mean, look at your situation. You're hardly unsuccessful.
Yeah, and I have
How do you
battled quite
manage
hard
it?
to get where I've got to.
Exactly. Good
So
for
that's
you.
okay. Battling is good. This is all
It's
about the fight.
inevitable.
But you talk about men fighting. I mean, let me just put another thing to you from the book.
Why
You're
wouldn't
saying
you have to
real.
battle for a high-quality position?
Well, I notice in your book you talk about real conversations between men containing, quote, an underlying threat of physicality.
Oh, there's no doubt about that.
What about real conversations between women? Is that something, or are we sort of too amenable and reasonable?
No, it's just that the domain of physical conflict is sort of off limits for you.
Well,
And
you
it's
just said
rather
that I've fought
unfortunate.
to get where I've got.
Yeah, but
What does that make me?
well,
a sort of proxy man or
I
something?
don't imagine that you've. Yeah, to some degree, I suspect you're not very agreeable.
So that's the thing. Successful women, I'm not very agreeable.
Right.
But
I've noticed that
successful-
actually in this conversation.
At least
and
we
I'm
can have a
sure
joke
it
about it.
served your career well.
Successful women, though,
Mm-hmm.
basically have to wear the trousers, in your view. They have to sort of become men to succeed, is what you're saying.
Well, if they're going
I've had to fight to succeed,
if they're
therefore
going to
I'm an
compete
honorary
against
man.
men, certainly masculine traits are going to be helpful. I mean,
Mm.
one of the things I do in my counseling practice, for example, when I'm consulting with women who are trying to advance their careers, is to teach them how to negotiate and to be able to say no and to not be easily pushed around and to be formidable. And you need to, if you're going to be successful, you need to be smart, conscientious, and tough.
Well, here's a radical idea. Why don't the bosses adopt the male bosses, shall we say, adopt some female traits so that women don't have to fight and get their sharp elbows out for the pay rises? It's just accepted if they're doing the same job, they get the same pay.
Well, I would say partly because it's not so easy to determine what constitutes the same job.
But
You know,
that's because, arguably,
yeah.
there are still men dominating our industries, our society, and therefore they've dictated the terms for so long that women have to battle to be like the men.
No, it's not true. It's not true. So, for
Where's the
example,
evidence?
well, I can give you an example very quickly. So I worked with women who worked in high-powered law firms in Canada for about 15 years, and they were as competent and put together as anybody you would ever meet. And we were trying to figure out how to further their careers. And there was a huge debate in Canadian society at that point that was basically ran along the same lines as your argument, is that if the law firms didn't use these masculine criteria, then perhaps women would do better. But the market sets the damn game. It's like...
And the market is dominated by men.
No,
So
it's
what
not.
I'm
It's
asking
not.
you-
The market is dominated by women. They make 80% of the consumer decisions. That's not the case
What?
at all.
If you're talking
80%.
about people who stay at home looking after children, by and large, they are still women. So they're going out doing the shopping. But that is changing.
They make all
Anyway,
the
what I want to
consumer
ask
decisions.
You, okay, so
The
what I want to
market
ask
is driven
you,
by
okay,
women, not men.
Right.
Okay, and if you're a lawyer
And they
in
still
Canada...
pay more for the same sort of goods. That's been proven, that men, you buy a blue bicycle helmet, it's going to cost less than a pink one. Anyway, we'll come on to
It's
that.
partly because men are less agreeable. Right, so they won't put up with it.
I want to ask you, is it not desirable to have some of those female traits you're talking about? I'd say that's a generalization, but you've used the words female traits. Is it not desirable to have some of them at the top of business? I mean, maybe there wouldn't have
They
been
don't predict
a
success.
banking crisis.
They
if
don't
that had
predict
happened.
success in the workplace. The things that predict success in the workplace are intelligence and conscientiousness. Agreeableness negatively predicts success in the workplace. And
you're
so does
saying
high
that-
negative emotion.
You're saying that women aren't intelligent enough to run these top companies?
No, I didn't say that at all.
You said that female traits don't predict success.
But I didn't say that intelligence
and
wasn't. I didn't say that
do.
intelligence and conscientiousness
Well, you were saying that
weren't
intelligence
female
and
traits.
conscientiousness by implication are not female traits.
No,
I mean,
I'm not
that's very
saying that.
dangerous territory.
I'm not saying that at all.
Are women less
There's-
intelligent than men, by and
No,
large?
no, they're not. No, the data on that's pretty clear. The average IQ for a woman and the average IQ for a man is identical. There is some debate about the flatness of the distribution, which is something that James Damore pointed out, for example, in his memo, but there's no difference at all in general cognitive ability. There's no difference to speak of in conscientiousness. Women are a bit more orderly than men, and men are a little bit more industrious than women, but the difference isn't big. But
know
that
plenty of-
averages into
Plenty of men
conscientiousness.
who aren't necessarily as
Well, of
industrious.
course,
But
these are- okay. But no,
female
but you
traits,
asked me
though,
the
why
question.
are they not...
Feminine traits,
Why
let's
are they
say.
not desirable at the top of... Feminine traits, why are they not desirable at the top of business?
It's hard to say. I'm just laying out the empirical evidence. Like we know the traits that predict success.
But we also know, because companies by and large have not been dominated by women over the centuries, we have nothing to compare it to. It's an experiment.
True, and it could be the case that if companies modified their behavior and became more feminine, that they would be successful. But
You
there's
seem
no
doubtful about
evidence
that.
for it. I'm not neither doubtful nor non-doubtful. There's no
So
evidence
why
for
not
it.
give it a go, as the
Because
radical
the evidence
feminists would
suggests,
say?
well, it's fine. If someone wants to start a company and make it more feminine and compassionate, let's say, and caring in its overall orientation towards its workers and towards the marketplace, then that's a perfectly reasonable experiment to run. My point is that there is no evidence that those traits predict success in the workplace. And there's
Because it's
this
never
evidence
been
is,
tried.
well, that's not really the case. Women have been in the workplace for what? At least ever since I've been around, the representation of women in the workplace has been about 50%. So we've run the experiment for a fairly reasonable period of time, but not, certainly not for centuries.
Let me move on to another debate that's been very controversial for you. And this is, you got in trouble for refusing to call trans men and women by their preferred personal pronouns.
好了，这个访谈关于两性议题的部分差不多就到这里。接下来他们讨论的是跨性别的议题，那个就留到下一集影片再讲吧。那因为影片已经有点长了，我就做简单的总结，不非要太多。首先，我觉得应该很多人看完应该跟我有类似的想法吧，就是这女主持人一直在试着曲解 Jordan Peterson 的话，我真的看了我是有点。就我觉得因为他是记者，你知道吗？记者就会这样，记者就是这样，就一直说啊，所以你的意思是啊，所以你就这样咯啊，所以你就是恋童癖啊，所以你就是怎样的。我是觉得这样好就是你可不可以好好说话？你没有必要这样子一直试着，他就是明显一直在试着挖坑给人家跳。就是人家跟他讲了一句话，然后他就一直说哦，所以你就是这个意思，你就是歧视女性，你就是说女性放弃吧，女性不可以受到公平的待遇。人家就没有这样讲，而且 Jordan Peterson 我为什么这么喜欢 Jordan Peterson？ 因为他从一开始他就是一直很彬彬有礼，他很 reasonable， 他就是就事论事，他就是拿证据说话，他就是说我就是拿证据说话。那这个事实，客观事实就是这样，我只是这样讲。他根本就没有歧视女性，他也没有支持说女性不应该受到公平的待遇，他支持女性受到公平的待遇，他只是在阐述更多的一般大众根本就没有去思考过的点。就比方说，好，什么是公平的待遇？结果上的平等就是真正的平等吗？对不对？齐头式平等跟结果式，就是所谓的，你看每个人的专长就不一样嘛，那每个人的起点也不一样，那什么才是真正的平等？如果所谓的平等是所有人的起跑点都是一样的才叫平等的话，那如果有的人，那假设我们今天在比身高，那有的人他天生就长得比较高，那天生长得比较矮的他就一定输啊。如果大家的起点都站得一样，那天生比较矮的人站在地上，跟天生比较高的人站在地上，比较高的人天生就赢了。所以所谓的平等到底是什么，是很难去定义的，太复杂了，尤其在现实层面。就如果只是用讲的，就在大家在讨论议题的时候，用空谈、纸上谈兵都很简单，嘴炮大家都会。就只需要想到一个面向，还有他前面有提到的嘛，就是说你如果作为一个合格的社会学家、一个学者，你要去分析一些社会上的现象，就比方说同工同酬这件事，就薪资差别待遇这件事情，你要去分析任何一个议题，都不可能只看单变量，就是你不可能只看说一个片面。这个也是已经被探讨到烂掉的行之有年的话题了，就是说，比方说新闻记者就特别喜欢扭曲这种东西，就是说，好。所有的罪犯，他们小时候都喝过牛奶，他就说好，根据统计学，这些罪犯小时候都喝过牛奶，所以导致喝牛奶等会引人犯罪。但他们最喜欢这样子啊，就说，宅男都看都看二次元，看动漫教坏小孩，打电动暴力教坏小孩，就在放那些不知所谓的狗屁。就是强词夺理，他们都在强词夺理，他们就只看很片面的东西，然后断章取义。以管窥天，以管窥豹，瞎子摸象，断章取义，曲解别人的话，然后曲解一个社会现象，就是从只看片面，然后就说，所以因为这样子，所以不平等，所以因为这样子，男性压迫女性之类的。就其实很多为什么 SJW 最喜欢玩这一套，因为就像 Jordan Peterson 说的，我们都可以去探讨，这些都是可以去被探讨的，而且也都是可以。你如果真的想要去实践，他说了嘛。 对不对？你想要去做一些社会实验，你想要去实验说，如果企业真的去更看重女性特质而不是男性特质，如果不是一直追求男子气概，如果你再更富有同理心，你再更软化，然后你再更亲和力高一点，也许你可以去试啊，你可以去试着做这样子，那看看它能不能导致你的公司获得成功。如果可以，那你这个就是一个成功的营销模式，然后以后就可以继续复制下去啊，然后也许社会真的就可以变得更好啊。但是你现在目前为止还没有证据可以证实这件事。然后最有趣的就在这点了，这个访谈已经是将近7年前的访谈了，好几年前了，所以现在来看根本就是预言，不是吗？ Jordan Peterson 根本就是预言家啊。他已经讲了，他当时讲说目前没有，他说你可以去做这个实验啊，然后但是目前没有证据证实这可以引来商业上的成功、事业上的成功。然后7年后的现在，我们看到什么？这些 DEI 这些 sjw 搞那些一堆游戏公司吗？影视产业公司吗？我就问 UBI 赔了多少钱？赔到脱裤子，现在要卖给腾讯爸爸了。迪士尼赔了多少钱啊？砍掉了多少电影？我就问猎魔士拍了几季啊？我就问，我们就看看这些 DEI 这些所谓的 DEI 部门到底在这个业界带来了多少的产值、多少的价值、到底引来了多少的成功，还是他们毁了多少的经典 IP， 毁了多少的公司？他们骗走了、烧毁了股东多少钱？那7年前 Jordan Peterson 就预言了，说，然后他们还在说，因为没有人试过啊，你怎么不试一下？怎么这些男性老板都不去接受一下女性特质？你们应该要空降更多的女性高管。然后加州就大火了，在那边加州就大火了，砍消防预算，然后空降一个女的在那边说什么？如果你老公需要我帮你老公扛出火场，就是你老公把自己放在不对的位置。就空降一堆这种充满了女性特质的好棒棒女主管，然后就变这样了，难道不是预言吗？好了，我觉得我又废话太多了。其实我还有很多想讲的，那我们留到下一集再讲好了，因为影片真的已经有点拖太长，而且我准备要出门了。那就先这样子，大家有什么想法都欢迎在留言区讨论，我接受任何的指教。我这个人是很开明的，我接受任何的辩论，接受任何的指教。大家有什么想法都可以讨论，我可能也有讲错的地方啊，我可能也有我的偏见跟成见啊，我接受指教。而且还有就是里面看到也有提到，我本来是因为这已经有别人翻译过了，我也看过别人翻译过的版本，可是我是真的看到一些我觉得他翻译的不够精准，甚至是翻译有错误的地方。那虽然我这样讲，但我也不代表我就是我就觉得自己很屌，我觉得自己翻译的才是正确的，人家翻的就是错误的，也不是这个意思。我也可能翻错啊，对不对？我也可能有理解上的错误啊，也许我们只是理解不一样，也许反而是我误解了，是不是？所以如果大家有看到觉得反而是我翻错的地方，那也欢迎留言跟我指正校正，我一定会再用CC 字幕修改。都接受指教，谢谢大家。那就这样，拜拜，祝大家都个美好今天，拜拜。那我们下集再见，拜拜。